Hi, I'm Aaron Weed. I'd like to show you how I took my ordinary 6-inch joiner and added these extensions to it. This is an older jet model joiner that I refurbished, but the tables are a little too short for my needs. Rather than spend about $1,000 for a longer joiner, I will add extensions to this one for about $150. The total length of this joiner is 46 inches. It works great for joining short boards like this one, giving a nice straight and clean cut. But when it comes to long boards like these, the short joiner just makes the process clumsy and inaccurate. Here's a rather long and heavy laminated board. It is too heavy to handle on the back side and becomes too heavy to handle as it passes the center point and the fulcrum changes to the other end of the table. As you can see here, the board can only make it so far before I can no longer control it. I estimate I only need about 10 more inches on either side of the table, and that'll make this a 66-inch long joiner. I could use independent rollers, but they require a lot of setup before each use to be accurate with the plane of the joiner table surface. I could build a wooden platform, but wood tends to expand and contract considerably with changes in humidity and temperature. So I went on eBay and purchased some angle iron and mild steel plates to make stable and strong extensions. The plates are 1/2 inch thick, 6 inches wide, and 10 inches long. The angle iron is 2 inch by 1/4 inch thick. The angle iron will mount to the sides of the beds, so it is important to plan the mounting holes around any support structures. The angle iron gets cut into 4 pieces, 2 for each end of the table. Then holes are drilled for mounting the brackets to the sides of the joiner beds. Filing edges and deburring holes is important for mounting accuracy. These are the pieces that will fit on one end of the joiner. I made this wooden block as a template to hold the angle iron in the proper position while I mount them to the joiner. Then more clamping to hold it all in the proper position. Once aligned, the holes can be drilled in the table. Bolts are inserted to temporarily hold the assembly in place. Now the clamps can be removed and bolts tightened. This will change the angle of the brackets because of the release angles on the cast iron joiner table. The template block here shows how much of an angle. Therefore, I have to use shims to get the brackets to align parallel with each other. This process will prevent torsion forces from being applied to the joiner beds when the plate extensions are bolted down to the brackets. After testing the shims, I ended up making several of different thicknesses and shapes to ensure the brackets were going to be aligned properly. Here, I'm placing them in the order that I found to work best. This process took several attempts to get right, and each side of the joiner needed different shapes and sizes. Now a test fit to see if I finally got it. Still using the template block, I can see I am getting closer. Once I got the brackets aligned, the next step is to work with the plates. The plates I got are cold rolled, which means they will maintain a straighter shape during the forming process, but they are still not straight enough for use as a joiner table. You can see here that this one is warped. In this test, you can see the plate is also cupped. So these plates need to be flattened before they are of any use. The ideal method of flattening the steel plates is with a mill or surface grinder. Most independent machine shops can do this for you. However, in the next section of this video, I'm going to show you how I flatten the plates using my metal lathe. Now I understand most people watching this video won't have metalworking machines in their shops, but I happen to have a metal lathe because I use it to refurbish old machines. So I'm showing you how I did it just for your reference. After cleaning the plate surfaces, I used double-sided tape to hold the plate onto the faceplate of the lathe. I found a box wrench to work really well at firmly adhering the tape. I thoroughly cleaned the faceplate to ensure the tape will stick. The tape does not hold well under centrifugal force without initially applying clamping pressure. The steel plates have a layer of scale on them. Carbide bits seem to work better than high-speed steel at removing the scale. This first pass is just a light pass. I attached a vacuum hose to remove the scale dust. Otherwise, the dust makes a mess on the lathe and gets under the lathe saddleways. Now it is easier to see how uneven this surface really is. I'll reset the lathe to take off a little more surface. A few more passes and it will be flat. A vacuum was no longer needed once the scale was removed. This cut surface is flat, but it's not smooth, so I set up a die grinder to give a bit more of a smoother surface. Once the first side is done, it is time to repeat the process on the other side. A finished surface is important for boards to easily slide across the plate. I made this jig to hold the plate in place and then used a diamond sharpening stone for smoothing. I start with 300 grit and then finish with 1000 grit. The holes I drill are for the mounting bolts to thread into the plate. This prevents from having a large recessed hole on top of the plate that accommodates a bolt or screw head. The larger the hole, then the more chance a board can get caught on the edge of the hole. With the horizontal brackets properly mounted and lined up, I can now drill the holes for the mounting bolts. These holes will be oversized to help with making adjustments later. I used 1-inch diameter aluminum rod to make spacers that will elevate the plates to the proper height. The holes in them are oversized to allow for easier adjustments later. You don't have to make aluminum spacers like I did. A thick-walled pipe will work just as well. The aluminum rod is just what I had laying around. Each spacer is numbered to correlate with its respective hole. This is because later, each spacer will have its height adjusted to get the plates properly lined up with the top of the joiner table. Now I can remove all pieces and prepare them for painting before final adjustments. 80 grit sandpaper works well at removing the scale so that the paint will bond better to the steel. All surfaces were carefully cleaned with a solvent. Normally I would use a primer, but in this case the paint will get dinged up from lots of use, so I'll skip that step on this project. After 3 coats of paint, I gave all surfaces a good waxing. Waxing makes cleaning the machine much easier and helps with paint durability. The unpainted surfaces also get waxed to prevent corrosion. Now I can do final assembly of the horizontal brackets and tighten the bolts firmly. This stage of the project is where I will start making the plate height adjustments. So I will keep the bolts loose until I get the plate close to the proper height to make sure any wobble is removed. If I were to tighten the bolts at the beginning, then I would cause the horizontal brackets to twist and give an improper alignment. I made the spacers extra long so that I could then measure how much height I need to remove from each one. This will minimize the amount of shims I will need to use. Also, the horizontal brackets are not exactly lined up, so independently adjusting the height of each spacer will make up for that imperfection. Having my measurements, I can now shave off some of the spacer height. I will leave a little extra until I get the final measurements. I'm using the lathe to take off the excess material, but a file or grinder will work too. Everything is assembled again for another measurement. This time the bolts will be tightened all the way. Then all measurements taken again, and the spacer height reduced some more on the table. Now I'm getting pretty close to having the plate accurately aligned, as you can see here, but one corner is about 3/1000ths of an inch too low. I made some shims to shore up the low corner. And a final waxing to ensure good coverage. One nice thing about this style of extension is that I can move the lathe without having to readjust anything. A test to check how accurate it is. There's a slight amount of curve to the edge, so I need to find where the adjustment needs to be made on the joiner. When making this plate parallel with the surface of the joiner bed, this method of using a dial indicator and a stand is effective. It will work, but it depends on your joiner bed table being perfectly flat. Now in my case here, this bed is slightly curved downward towards this end. So it gives me, with this end being a little too high, which creates that curve in the board that I showed you earlier. So I got a hold of a machinist straight edge. This straight edge here is extremely accurate. And setting it up like this, I have a 5/1000 inch gap gauge here, and I can slide it underneath here from just one end to the other, just in the middle, which means that I've got to lower this end a little bit. The other side of the bed was just as poorly machined, so I made adjustments to the spacer height on both sides to get them parallel. Alright, so I've just readjusted this additional plate right here, and now I've got it parallel with the table, but I'm going to show you how far off this table was machined originally. So with a 1/1000 inch gap tester, I can see that right there is the point where the straight edge makes contact with the bed. Then I move it over here and it makes contact again right there with the bed. So this is a low spot right through here. And 3/1000ths, not much of a gap, but a gap nonetheless. But it doesn't really affect the accuracy. 3/1000ths of an inch doesn't affect the accuracy too much of the bed. But it does make a difference when this plate is not made parallel with the two ends of the table that are straight. A final test cut. Now you can see the boards make full contact through their full length. Now to try that big board that gave me trouble before. Well, the extensions are completed, and I couldn't be happier with them. I had far more control over this long board, and even more control over these shorter boards than I had before. Just adding 10 more inches to each side made that much of a difference. However, if I were to make one change to this, I would add 2 inches to either side for a total of 70-inch bed length. That would have been perfect for a board of this size and weight. Now, I know some of my process may have seemed a bit cumbersome for just putting short extensions on a joiner. But the nice thing about this is that the joiner is still mobile. No adjustments need to be made after I move it. I don't have any legs down here that I have to contend with, uneven floors to worry about. It's good as it is. This is a permanent modification that I don't have to mess with again. Well, I hope this gave you some ideas, and thank you for watching.